My name is Amanda Wilson, 28 years old, and the day my beloved grandfather Harold died changed everything. At the will, reading his lawyer, Lawrence handed me a check for $38 million. My estranged parents, Margaret and Robert, who barely acknowledged me for years, suddenly noticed me. They ripped the check from my hands and set it ablaze right there in the office. Everyone gasped in horror. I just smiled. What they destroyed was merely a symbol, not my actual inheritance. Let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I turned my parents' desperate act into my greatest triumph. To understand what happened that day, you need to know about my family. Grandpa Harold built Wilson Enterprises from nothing. Starting with a single hardware store in 1973, he expanded into construction, real estate, and eventually technology investments. By the time I was born, he was worth hundreds of millions. But money never changed who he was at heart, a kind, honest man who believed in hard work and integrity. My parents were a different story. My mother, Margaret, was Grandpa Harold's daughter. She grew up with wealth and never knew anything else. Dad, Robert, came from a middle-class family and was dazzled by the Wilson fortune when he met Mom in college. They married quickly, and I arrived 2 years later. From my earliest memories, they were absent figures in my life, too busy jet-setting around the world, attending galas, and spending grandpa money. Growing up in our sprawling mansion in Connecticut, I was raised primarily by nannies. Mom would breeze in from Paris or Milan with expensive gifts, ruffle my hair, and disappear again. Dad was always locked in his home office, making calls and securing deals that would expand his personal wealth separate from the family business. Neither of them attended my school plays, swim meets, or even most of my birthdays. Grandpa Harold noticed. When I was 7, he stepped in. What started as weekend visits to his lake house turned into extended stays. By the time I was 10, I was spending more time with him than with my parents, and they hardly seemed to notice. He would pick me up from school in his modest sedan, while my parents sent drivers in luxury cars, on the rare occasions they remembered. At his lake house, Grandpa taught me to fish, build birdhouses, and understand business fundamentals. We would sit on the dock at sunset, and he would explain concepts like profit margins, ethical leadership, and the responsibility that comes with wealth. He always said the Wilson name means something, Amanda. People trust us because we have always done right by them. As I grew older, the contrast between Grandpa values and my parents' lifestyle became more apparent. Mom and Dad viewed the family fortune as their birthright, an endless resource to fund their extravagance. When I turned 16, they gifted me a brand new sports car that I never asked for. Grandpa quietly helped me exchange it for a reliable sedan, putting the difference in a college fund he had established for me. My education became a point of contention. My parents wanted me to attend an exclusive private university where their friends' children went. Grandpa encouraged me to choose based on academic programs. I ended up studying business and ethics at a well-respected state university, much to my parents' dismay. Throughout college, Grandpa called weekly, while my parents sent occasional checks with impersonal notes attached. After graduation, Grandpa offered me an entry-level position at Wilson Enterprises. I would receive no special treatment and would start at the bottom just as he believed everyone should. My parents were horrified, insisting I should at least be given a director title. I declined their interference and spent 2 years learning the company from the ground up, working in customer service, sales, and operations before moving into management. During this time, the rift between Grandpa and my parents grew deeper. They pushed for riskier investments, shortcuts in quality control, and aggressive tax strategies that bordered on illegal. Grandpa resisted maintaining the ethical standards that had built his reputation. Board meetings became battlegrounds, with my father recruiting allies to challenge Grandpa leadership. I witnessed all of this, taking careful notes and learning. When I voiced concerns about some of my father's proposed deals, my parents began to see me as an obstacle too. Our already strained relationship deteriorated further. At holiday gatherings, they would barely speak to me. directing their attention to my cousins Jessica and Travis, who were more sympathetic to their vision for the company. When Grandpa was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 84, my world shattered. The doctors gave him 6 months. He spent that time putting his affairs in order, but also ensuring we made the most of our remaining days together. We took one last fishing trip to his favorite lake in Montana. He was too weak to cast a line, but he smiled as I caught a rainbow trout using the technique he had taught me decades earlier. As he grew sicker, I spent every possible moment by his side. My parents' visits were brief and awkward. I noticed them discussing property values and auction houses when they thought no one could hear. 2 weeks before he passed, Grandpa asked for private time with Lawrence Bennett, his attorney and closest friend since childhood. They spent hours behind closed doors over several days. When I asked about it, Grandpa just winked and said, "Patience, Mandy. Some things are worth waiting for." Grandpa Harold passed peacefully in his sleep on a Tuesday morning in April. I was holding his hand. My parents arrived 3 hours later, already dressed in designer black attire. As we planned the funeral, they began making inquiries about the will reading. Lawrence informed us it would take place the following week, after we had properly laid Grandpa to rest. The funeral was exactly as Grandpa would have wanted: simple, dignified, with stories shared by those whose lives he had touched. Hundreds attended, including employees who had worked for him for decades. My parents seemed impatient throughout the service, checking their watches and taking calls. I noticed Lawrence watching them with a strange expression that I could not quite decipher. The day before the will reading, Lawrence called me. "Amanda," he said, "your grandfather wanted me to tell you to trust the process tomorrow. No matter what happens, remember everything he taught you." At the time, I did not understand what he meant. I would soon find out. The morning of the will reading dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully in a conservative black dress that Grandpa had always complimented, paired with the pearl necklace he had given me for my college graduation. The law offices of Bennett and Associates occupied the top floor of a downtown building that the Wilson family had actually built 30 years earlier. I arrived 15 minutes early, as Grandpa had taught me that punctuality was a form of respect. The receptionist, Diane, greeted me warmly. She had known me since I was a child, visiting the office with Grandpa. "I know this is difficult, Amanda," she said, squeezing my hand. "Your grandfather was so proud of you. He talked about you constantly." "Thank you, Diane," I replied, fighting back tears. "I miss him terribly." She led me to the large conference room where the reading would take place. Lawrence was already there, organizing papers at the head of the mahogany table that dominated the space. "Amanda," he said, looking up. His eyes were kind but held something else, concern perhaps. "Thank you for being prompt. Your grandfather valued that quality in you." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Lawrence had been present for so many important moments in my life. He had attended my high school and college graduations when my parents had sent regrets due to scheduling conflicts. "Can I get you anything? Coffee, water?" he asked. "Water would be nice, thank you," I said, taking a seat midway down the table. I deliberately chose not to sit at either end, unsure of the protocol. As Lawrence stepped out, my Aunt Stephanie arrived. She was my mother's younger sister, more reasonable than my mother, but still firmly in the materialistic camp of the family. She kissed my cheeks and took a seat across from me. "Amanda, darling, how are you holding up?" she asked, though her eyes were already scanning the room, likely assessing what might soon be hers. "One day at a time, Aunt Stephanie," I replied politely. My cousins, Jessica and Travis, arrived next. Jessica was 25, 3 years younger than me, and had always been kind despite our parents' differences. She worked in marketing for a fashion magazine and had little interest in the family business. She gave me a genuine hug before sitting beside me. Travis, 32, and already on his second marriage, nodded curtly in my direction before taking a seat near the far end of the table. He had aligned himself with my father years ago, hoping for a powerful position in the company despite having little business acumen. The minutes ticked by, and still my parents had not arrived. The reading was scheduled for 10 o'clock sharp, and it was now 9:58. Lawrence returned with waters for everyone, his expression growing increasingly concerned as he checked his watch. At 10:04, the double doors swung open dramatically, and my parents made their entrance. Mom wore an obviously new black designer suit with gold accents that seemed inappropriate for the occasion. Dad followed in an Italian suit that probably cost more than what most people made in 3 months. They did not apologize for their lateness. Lawrence's mother said, nodding toward him before turning to me with a cool daughter. She had not called me Amanda in years, as though using my name would create unwanted intimacy between us. Dad merely grunted in my general direction before they both took seats at the far end of the table, distancing themselves physically from me as they had emotionally for years. Lawrence, ever the professional, showed no reaction to their rudeness. He simply cleared his throat and said, "Now that everyone is here, we can begin." He opened a leather portfolio containing what I assumed was Grandpa Will. "Before we start," Mother interrupted, "I trust this will not take long. Robert and I have a lunch reservation at 1. I caught Jessica rolling her eyes, and we shared a brief moment of solidarity. Lawrence smiled thinly. "I will take precisely as long as necessary to execute Herald instructions properly, Margaret," he said. "Now, if there are no further interruptions." My father checked his expensive watch ostentatiously but remained silent. The tension in the room was palpable. I could feel my heart racing and took a deep breath, remembering Grandpa's advice during stressful situations. "Focus on what you can control, Mandy. Your reactions are always your choice." Lawrence adjusted his glasses and began to read. The preamble was standard legal language, establishing that Grandpa had been of sound mind and body when the will was drafted. Then came the specific bequests. Grandpa had remembered everyone. His housekeeper of 30 years, Maria, received a generous pension and the cottage on his property where she had lived. His gardener got the vintage truck he had always admired. Long-term employees received financial gifts and personal items that showed how well Grandpa had known and valued each of them. As Lawrence continued, I noticed my parents growing increasingly restless. Mom tapped her manicured nails on the table, while Dad shifted in his seat. Their impatience was obvious. They were waiting for the big reveal, the division of the substantial Wilson fortune. To my cousin, Jessica, Harold left his collection of first edition books, knowing her love of literature, along with a trust fund of $500,000. Jessica gasped softly beside me, tears filling her eyes. Grandpa had remembered her passion for classic novels, something her own parents had often dismissed. To Travis, Harold left his collection of vintage watches and a similar trust fund. Travis smirked, clearly disappointed it was not more. To his daughter, Margaret, Lawrence continued, and my mother sat up straighter, her eyes suddenly laser-focused, and her son-in-law, Robert. Dad leaned forward, barely concealing his anticipation. Lawrence paused, taking a sip of water. The room was completely silent. I could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the wall, a sound that reminded me of long afternoons in Grandpa's study, learning about business ethics and responsibility. "Harold leaves his vacation properties in Aspen and the Hamptons," Lawrence finally said, along with his collection of artwork and antiques, valued at approximately $20 million. Mother's smile was triumphant, though I could tell from the tightening around her eyes that she had expected more. Much more. And to his beloved granddaughter, Amanda, Lawrence continued, turning to face me directly. My parents' attention suddenly shifted to me, as if really seeing me for the first time that day. I kept my expression neutral, unsure what was coming. "Harold leaves the remainder of his estate, including controlling interest in Wilson Enterprises, his primary residence, investment portfolios, and liquid assets, totaling approximately $38 million in immediate funds, majority shareholding valued at over $300 million. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat perfectly still, unable to process what I had just heard. Then the room erupted. "What? This is outrageous!" Mother shrieked, rising to her feet so quickly that her chair toppled backward. Dad's face turned an alarming shade of red. "There must be some mistake," he sputtered, looking at Lawrence with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Lawrence remained perfectly composed. "There is no mistake, Robert. These were Harold's explicit wishes, documented and witnessed according to all legal requirements." He reached into his portfolio and removed an envelope from which he extracted a certified check. It was made out to me for $38 million exactly. My name was printed in neat banker script across the center. Amanda Lawrence said, holding the check out to me, "This represents the liquid portion of your inheritance. The paperwork for the rest will require more extensive processing." In a daze, I reached for the check. It felt surreal to hold such a sum in my trembling fingers. The amount represented more money than I could comprehend, yet it was only a fraction of what Grandpa had left me. Before I could even examine it properly, Mother moved with startling speed. She snatched the check from my hands, her nails scratching my palm. "This is a mistake that needs correcting," she hissed. "I am Harold's only child. The company should rightfully go to me." Dad had joined her, now standing shoulder to shoulder in a united front. "Give me that," he said, taking the check from my mother. What happened next occurred so quickly that I barely had time to react. Dad pulled an engraved lighter from his pocket, the same one he used for the expensive cigars he enjoyed. With a flick of his thumb, a flame appeared. "If we can not have it, neither can she," he said coldly, touching the flame to the corner of the check. The paper caught immediately. Orange flames licked upward, consuming my name and the enormous sum in seconds. Dad dropped the burning check onto the conference table, where it curled and blackened against the polished wood. Jessica gasped. Travis looked stunned. Aunt Stephanie covered her mouth with her hand. Lawrence made a move as if to stop them, but it was already too late. The check was nothing but ashes. Throughout this shocking display, I remained seated, watching the flames die out. A strange calm had settled over me. Instead of the panic or rage that might have been expected, I felt a surprising sense of clarity. As the last ember faded, I looked up at my parents' triumphant faces and did something that clearly unnerved them. I smiled. My reaction was not what anyone had anticipated, least of all my parents. Their expressions of vindictive satisfaction faltered, replaced by confusion. "Why are you smiling?" Mother demanded, her voice shrill. "Are you having some kind of breakdown?" Dad added, frowning. I simply shook my head, maintaining my composure. Their dramatic gesture had revealed everything about their character, just as Grandpa had always warned me. In their moment of perceived victory, they had shown their true selves to everyone in the room. Lawrence cleared his throat, drawing all eyes to him. "Well," he said dryly, "that was theatrical. Unfortunately for you, Margaret and Robert, it was also completely meaningless." "What are you talking about?" Dad snapped. Lawrence adjusted his glasses, the picture of professional calm. "That check was merely symbolic, a representation of Amanda's inheritance. The actual funds were transferred to accounts in her name last week. The check was Harold's idea. He had a flair for the dramatic too, it seems." My parents stared at him in growing horror as the implications sank in. Furthermore, Lawrence continued, glancing at me with a hint of pride, "Amanda has already been installed as the controlling shareholder of Wilson Enterprises. The board voted on it 2 weeks before Harold's passing at his recommendation. The paperwork was finalized 3 days ago." I remembered those private meetings between Grandpa and Lawrence during Grandpa's final days. Now I understood what they had been arranging. "That is not possible," Mother whispered. Though her conviction was clearly wavering, the board would have informed us. "The board was sworn to secrecy until after the will reading," Lawrence explained. Harold was very specific about the timing. He wanted everyone to show their true colors first. Dad collapsed back into his chair, the fight visibly draining from him. "You cannot do this," he said weakly. "We will contest the will." Lawrence smiled thinly. "You are welcome to try, Robert. However, I should inform you that Harold anticipated your reaction. He spent considerable time and resources ensuring this arrangement would be legally unassailable. He had a team of 5 attorneys besides myself review every detail. While my parents processed this devastating information, I finally found my voice. Throughout my life, I said quietly, Grandpa tried to teach all of us about integrity, responsibility, and the true value of the Wilson name. Some of us were better students than others. My mother turned on me, eyes blazing. "You ungrateful little snake. You manipulated him in his old age, turned him against his own daughter." "No," Margaret Lawrence interjected. "Harold was extremely clear-minded until the end. In fact, he documented his reasons extensively in letters that are part of the legal record. His decision was based on years of observation and consideration." Jessica reached over and squeezed my hand supportively. Travis, on the other hand, was eyeing me with new calculation, clearly reassessing his position now that I held the keys to the kingdom. "This is not over," Dad threatened, standing again. "We have friends' connections. We will fight this with everything we have." I met his gaze steadily. "I understand you are upset, Dad, but think carefully about your next steps. Grandpa left you and Mom $20 million in property and assets. That is a fortune by any reasonable standard. Is it worth risking that to fight a battle that Lawrence has just told you was designed to be unwinnable?" For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. Then Mother tugged at his sleeve and his expression hardened again. Lawrence gathered his papers calmly. "I suggest everyone take some time to process this information. Amanda," he said, turning to me, "there are additional documents we should review privately. Would you be available to continue this discussion in my office?" I nodded, still feeling strangely detached from the drama unfolding around me. As I stood to follow Lawrence, I noticed the pile of ashes that had been the $38 million check. It seemed so insignificant now, a meaningless gesture that had only revealed my parents' desperation and greed. As Lawrence and I walked toward the door, he paused and turned back to address the room. "By the way, Harold made one final request. He asked that I inform everyone that any attempt to contest the will would result in the immediate forfeiture of all bequests to the contesting parties. The funds would then be redirected to the charitable foundation Amanda will be establishing in her grandfather's name. Just something to consider." With that parting statement, we left my stunned family behind and walked toward Lawrence's office, where the real work would begin. As soon as Lawrence closed his office door behind us, I felt the calm facade I had maintained begin to crumble. My hands trembled as I sank into the leather chair across from his desk. "Are you all right, Amanda?" he asked, gently pouring me a glass of water from a crystal decanter that had sat on his desk for as long as I could remember. "I think so," I managed, taking the glass gratefully. "It is just a lot to process. I knew Grandpa trusted me, but I never expected all of this." Lawrence nodded sympathetically as he settled into his chair. Harold was extremely strategic about his decisions. He did not want to burden you with this knowledge while he was ill. He felt it would distract from the time you had left together. The thought brought fresh tears to my eyes. Even in his final days, Grandpa had been thinking of my emotional well-being. Lawrence reached into his desk and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "This contains the complete documentation of your inheritance," he explained. "But before we get into the legal details, I think you should read this." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's familiar, slightly shaky handwriting. I recognized it immediately from the birthday cards and notes of encouragement he had sent me throughout my life. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Mandy, it began. If you are reading this, then Lawrence has executed my wishes exactly as instructed. I imagine your parents have reacted poorly to the news. Do not let their anger or accusations trouble you. This decision was made with complete clarity and conviction. From the day you were born, I recognized something special in you, a natural integrity and compassion that reminded me of myself at a much younger age. As I watched you grow, those qualities only strengthened. While your parents became increasingly consumed by wealth and status, you remained grounded in the values that truly matter. Wilson Enterprises was built on trust, quality, and ethical business practices. In recent years, I have had to fight to maintain those standards against pressure from your parents and their allies. I knew I needed to ensure the company legacy would continue in the right hands after I was gone. Your hands, Amanda. Do not doubt your readiness for this responsibility. I have watched you work your way up from the bottom, learning every aspect of the business. Your colleagues respect you not because you are my granddaughter, but because you have earned their trust through hard work and fair treatment. The $38 million that Lawrence presented to you today is indeed yours to use as you see fit. But the true inheritance is the company itself and the opportunity to lead it with the same principles that have guided me. I have arranged for Emma Peters, your friend from business school, who now works in our legal department, to assist you during the transition. She is one of the few people who knew of these arrangements beforehand. There will be resistance, especially from your parents' allies on the board. Stand firm. You are stronger than you know, and you are now the majority shareholder. Remember that with this great power comes equally great responsibility to our employees, customers, and community. I regret that I will not be there to see you flourish in this role, but I leave this world confident in my choice. You, Amanda, are my greatest legacy. All my love, Grandpa Harold. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. Lawrence quietly handed me a box of tissues. He was so certain, I whispered. What if I am not ready? What if I cannot live up to his expectations? Lawrence smiled kindly. Amanda Harold would not have made this decision if he had any doubts. He spent the last 5 years quietly preparing you and the company for this transition. You may not have realized it, but those special projects he assigned you, the meetings he insisted you attend, they were all part of your grooming for leadership. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. So what happens now? Lawrence opened the manila envelope and spread several documents across his desk. Now we make it official. The symbolic check your parents burned was exactly that, symbolic. The real funds are already in accounts under your name at First National Bank. Harold transferred them last month. He pointed to a bank statement showing a balance that made me dizzy to look at. Then he moved to another document. This is the certification of your position as majority shareholder and new chairwoman of Wilson Enterprises. The board has already ratified it, though it was kept confidential until today. I stared at the official document bearing the signatures of all 12 board members, including several I knew were close to my father. How did Grandpa convince them? Lawrence chuckled. Some were convinced by logical business arguments about your qualifications. Others responded to financial incentives that Harold arranged. And a few, I suspect, were persuaded by the evidence Harold had collected regarding certain irregular activities they had conducted with your father's assistance. My head snapped up. Evidence? What kind of evidence? Lawrence's expression turned serious. Over the past few years, Harold became aware of some concerning business practices that your father was engaged in. Nothing definitively illegal, but certainly ethically questionable. Tax avoidance schemes, misleading financial reports, pressure on employees to cut corners. Harold documented everything meticulously. I remembered occasions when Grandpa had seemed troubled after board meetings, though he had never shared the details with me. Now I understood why he had been protecting me. A knock at the door interrupted us. Lawrence called for the person to enter, and Emma Peters, my friend from business school who now worked in the company legal department, stepped in. Her expression was a mixture of sympathy and determination. Amanda, she said, coming to hug me. I am so sorry about your grandfather, and I am sorry I could not tell you about any of this sooner. Harold swore us all to secrecy. I nodded understanding but still somewhat hurt that even friends had kept me in the dark. Your parents are still in the conference room, Emma reported. They are threatening to call their lawyers. Travis is with them, but Jessica and your aunt have left. Lawrence sighed. I expected as much. Amanda, we should proceed with the formal acknowledgement of your position. Are you ready? No, I thought honestly, but Grandpa believed I was, and that would have to be enough for now. Yes, I said aloud. Let us do this. Lawrence gathered several documents into a folder. Emma, he said, please ask Margaret and Robert to join us in my office. It is time they understand exactly what Harold has arranged. Emma nodded and left to deliver the message. While we waited, Lawrence briefed me quickly on what would happen next. Legal filings, public announcements, a formal introduction to the board as chairwoman. When the door opened again, my parents entered with stony expressions. Dad clutched his phone as if it were a weapon. Have you come to your senses? Mother asked coldly. Are you going to rectify this ridiculous situation? I straightened in my chair, drawing strength from Grandpa's letter in my pocket. There is nothing to rectify, Mom. This was Grandpa's decision made with great care and consideration. Lawrence gestured for them to sit. Margaret Robert, he said formally, I have asked you here to ensure you fully understand Harold arrangements. Regardless of your feelings about his decisions, you need to be aware of the legal realities. He passed them each a document. These are the official certificates confirming Amanda's position as majority shareholder and chairwoman of Wilson Enterprises. As you can see, they bear the signatures of all board members, including several of your close associates, Robert. Dad scanned the document, his jaw tightening. They had no right to do this behind my back. This is corporate espionage. Actually, Lawrence replied calmly, it was a legitimate board action proposed by the founder and majority shareholder at the time, Harold Wilson. Every legal protocol was followed meticulously. He handed them another document. This details the assets that have been bequeathed to you, both considerable real estate holdings and art collections valued at approximately $20 million. You are still very wealthy people. Mother barely glanced at the paper. $20 million is nothing compared to what should have been ours. The company is worth hundreds of millions. Lawrence nodded. Yes, it is. And Harold chose Amanda to lead it. His reasons are outlined in extensive documentation, which I can provide to your lawyers when they inevitably request it. He leaned forward, his expression growing stern. However, before you proceed with any legal challenges, you should be aware of one more thing. Harold instructed me to inform you that should you contest the will or attempt to undermine Amanda's position, certain information would be released to the board, the shareholders, and if necessary, to regulatory authorities. Dad's face paled slightly. What information? Lawrence looked at me silently, asking if I wanted to continue this conversation. I nodded. They needed to understand the full situation. Grandpa kept records, I said quietly, about the offshore accounts, the misleading financial reports, the pressure on employees to falsify quality control data, all of it. The shock on their faces confirmed what I had suspected. They had not thought Grandpa was aware of these activities. That is preposterous. Dad blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. Lawrence slid another folder across the desk. This contains copies of some of that documentation. Harold did not want to use this information during his lifetime. He valued family peace. But he was very clear that if you challenged Amanda's leadership, I was to use every resource to protect his decision. My parents exchanged glances, a wordless communication passing between them. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in their expressions. What exactly are you suggesting? Mother asked, her voice tight. I am not suggesting anything, Margaret Lawrence replied. I am simply informing you of the facts. You have been left a very generous inheritance. Amanda is now legally in control of Wilson Enterprises. Any attempt to challenge these arrangements would be costly, time-consuming, and potentially damaging to your reputations and financial security. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Finally, Dad spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "We need time to discuss this privately and consult with our attorneys," he said. Of course, Lawrence agreed. "Take whatever time you need. The documents will be formally filed tomorrow, and a press release announcing Amanda as the new chairwoman will go out the following day." As they rose to leave, I felt compelled to make one last attempt at reconciliation. "Mom, Dad," I said softly, "it does not have to be this way. We could work together. I would welcome your experience and input as I take on this role." Mother looked at me with cold eyes. "Do not patronize us, Amanda. You have taken what should have been ours. Do not expect us to help you enjoy the spoils." With that parting shot, they left, closing the door firmly behind them. I sank back in my chair, emotionally exhausted. Lawrence watched me with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked again. "I will be," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Grandpa prepared me for this moment. I will not let him down." Lawrence smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Harold would be extremely proud of how you handled yourself today, and for what it is worth, so am I." Emma, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward. "We should discuss next steps, Amanda. There is a lot to do before the announcement." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "All right," I said, straightening my shoulders. "Let us get to work." 3 days after the will reading, I arrived at Wilson Enterprises headquarters for my first official day as chairwoman. The building, a gleaming tower of glass and steel in downtown Chicago, had always intimidated me despite my family connection. Today it felt especially imposing. Emma met me in the lobby, professional in a tailored suit, but with a supportive smile that calmed my nerves. "Ready for this?" she asked, handing me a coffee just the way I liked it. "As ready as I will ever be," I replied, smoothing down my blazer. Grandpa always said courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important. Emma nodded approvingly. The executive team is gathered in the boardroom. Lawrence is already there. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent as I mentally reviewed what I knew about each executive. Some had been loyal to Grandpa for decades. Others were more recent hires brought in by my father to support his vision for the company: more aggressive growth, less emphasis on the ethical standards Grandpa had established. When we entered the boardroom, 12 faces turned toward us. Lawrence stood at the head of the table, but immediately gestured for me to take the chair, a symbolic passing of the torch. I recognized the subtle power move and appreciated his support. "Good morning, everyone," I said, pleased that my voice sounded steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. "Thank you for being here today." I surveyed the room, noting the various expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Walter Green, my father's closest ally on the board, made no attempt to hide his disdain. "I believe Lawrence has already informed you of the changes in leadership," I continued. "I want to assure you that this transition will be as smooth as possible. Wilson Enterprises has been built on certain core values: integrity, quality, and respect for all stakeholders. Those values will remain our guiding principles." Walter snorted audibly. "With all due respect, Miss Wilson," he said, emphasizing the miss with subtle condescension, "you have been with the company for 3 years? Most of us have decades of experience. Perhaps a more appropriate role would be for you to maintain ownership while allowing those with actual expertise to run the company." I met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. "That is an interesting perspective, Walter. But as I recall, your expertise led to the West Side Project fiasco last year, which cost the company $15 million and damaged our reputation with the City Planning Commission." Walter's face reddened. That project had unforeseen complications. Actually, I countered, keeping my tone, even those complications were outlined in a risk assessment report that you chose to ignore. I know because I contributed to that report. Several board members exchanged surprised glances. I had done my homework reviewing major decisions and their outcomes over the past 5 years. I continued, addressing the entire room. I respect the experience in this room. I also recognize that some of you may have concerns about my leadership. That is fair. But make no mistake, I am now the majority shareholder and chairwoman of this company. You are welcome to be part of Wilson Enterprises' future, but that future will honor the principles my grandfather established. The CFO, Patricia Henderson, spoke up. What changes should we expect, Amanda? I appreciated her directness and use of my first name, a small sign of respect. First, a complete audit of all ongoing projects and financial practices, I said. Second, a review of our environmental impact and labor practices. Third, a recommitment to the quality standards that made our reputation. We will still pursue growth, but not at the expense of our core values. The discussion continued for over an hour as I outlined my vision for the company. Some executives seemed cautiously supportive, others clearly skeptical. By the end, I had established my authority, even if I had not won everyone over. As the meeting concluded, I asked Walter and two other executives closely aligned with my father to stay behind. Once the room had cleared, except for Lawrence and Emma, I addressed them directly. I know where your loyalties lie, I said frankly. I am not naive. You have been carrying out my father's vision, sometimes using methods that Grandpa would never have approved. You have a choice now. You can adapt to the new direction of this company, or you can resign with generous severance packages. Walter leaned forward aggressively. Are you threatening us? I shook my head. I am offering you a dignified choice. I have documentation of several decisions that violated company policy and possibly federal regulations. I would prefer not to use it. The three men exchanged uneasy glances. Lawrence slid folders across the table to each of them. These contain the evidence Amanda is referring to, he said calmly. Also included are the severance terms should you choose to depart. You have 48 hours to decide. After they left visibly shaken, Emma gave me an admiring look. That was impressive, Amanda. Harold taught you well. I exhaled slowly, the tension draining from my shoulders. I hope I am doing the right thing. Lawrence nodded reassuringly. You are. The company needs this course correction. Our conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. The screen showed it was my mother. I hesitated before answering. Hello, Mom, I said cautiously. Her voice was cold. We need to talk. Your father and I are downstairs in the lobby. I glanced at Lawrence, who nodded encouragingly. Send them up, he mouthed. Fine, I told her. Come to the executive boardroom on the top floor. Security will escort you. 20 minutes later, my parents were seated across from me at the boardroom table. Lawrence and Emma remained present at my request. Their legal expertise provided a buffer I desperately needed. You have made your point, Amanda, Dad began without preamble. You have embarrassed us and seized control. Name your price. He blinked, confused. My price? To sell us your shares, Mother clarified impatiently. Everyone has a number. What is yours? I almost laughed at the absurdity. You think this is about money? After everything that has happened, you still do not understand. Enlighten us then, Dad said sarcastically. I leaned forward, meeting their eyes. This is about Grandpa's legacy, about the company he built and the values he instilled in me. It is not for sale at any price. Mother scoffed. Such nobility. We taught you better than that. No, I replied quietly. You did not teach me much at all. Grandpa did. And what he taught me was that the Wilson name stands for something that matters more than profit margins. Dad's expression darkened. We have friends in this industry, Amanda. Powerful friends. We can make things very difficult for you. Lawrence cleared his throat. That would be unwise, Robert. As I explained previously, any attempts to undermine Amanda's position would have consequences. Is that right? Dad challenged. And what if we already have evidence of our own documentation of Harold's declining mental state in his final months? Witnesses who will testify he was not of sound mind when making these changes. The threat hung in the air. I felt a chill run through me at the realization that they would go this far attack Grandpa's memory and dignity just to regain control. Emma spoke up, her voice professional but with an edge of steel. We anticipated this approach, Robert. That is why Harold underwent 3 separate mental competency evaluations in his final months conducted by independent specialists. The results are part of the legal record. He was entirely sound of mind. Dad's face showed a flicker of defeat before hardening again. We also have affidavits from his primary physician and oncologist, Lawrence added. Additionally, all board meetings where these changes were discussed were recorded with Harold's explicit consent. The tapes clearly show his lucidity and decisiveness. My parents exchanged glances, their backup plan clearly crumbling. I sighed deeply. Why are you doing this? $20 million is more than most people see in a lifetime. You could live comfortably forever on that. Why is it not enough? For a moment, vulnerability showed on my mother's face. You would not understand, Amanda. When you have been promised something your entire life, when you believe it is your birthright, having it taken away is not about the money. It is about what you feel entitled to. It was perhaps the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I considered her words carefully. I do understand feeling entitled to something, Mom. I felt entitled to parents who would be present, who would love me for who I was, not what I could do for them. We all have disappointments to face. The barb hit home. Mother flinched visibly. This meeting is pointless, Dad said, abruptly standing. You have made your choice. Now you will have to live with the consequences. What consequences exactly? I asked, keeping my voice steady. You have chosen business over family, he replied coldly. So be it. Consider yourself an orphan, Amanda. You are no longer our daughter. Though I had anticipated their rejection, the finality of his words still stung. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears that threatened to betray my composure. That is your choice to make, Dad, I said quietly. My door will remain open if you ever change your mind. But the company stays with me as Grandpa intended. As they turned to leave, Mother paused at the door. Do not contact us again, she said, without looking back. You made your bed. Now lie in it. After they left, I sat in silence, absorbing the weight of what had just transpired. Lawrence placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. Family is not always blood, Amanda, he said gently. Harold knew that, so do you. Emma squeezed my other hand. You have people who believe in you, who support you. Focus on that. I nodded, drawing strength from their presence. The path ahead would be challenging, but I was not walking it alone. Grandpa had ensured that too. 3 months after assuming control of Wilson Enterprises, I stood at the window of what had been Grandpa's office, and was now mine, looking out over the Chicago skyline. The early autumn sunset painted the glass towers in shades of gold and amber, a fitting metaphor for the transformation the company was undergoing. The transition had not been easy. As expected, Walter Green and the other executives loyal to my father had resigned rather than adapt to the new direction. Their departures had created temporary gaps in leadership, but also opportunities to bring in fresh perspectives. I had promoted from within where possible, valuing institutional knowledge and loyalty, and recruited externally for positions requiring specialized expertise. Lisa Chen, my new chief operating officer, knocked on the open door, interrupting my reflection. The quarterly numbers are ready for review, she said, entering with a tablet in hand. And I think you will be pleased. Lisa had been a mid-level operations manager when I took over someone. Grandpa had mentioned as having exceptional potential, but who had been repeatedly passed over for promotion during my father's influence. She had proven Grandpa right, streamlining our processes while maintaining quality standards. "Let me see," I said, taking the tablet. The financial report showed modest but solid growth, exactly what I had aimed for: sustainable progress, rather than the aggressive expansion my father had pushed for at the expense of quality and ethics. "This is excellent work, Lisa," I said sincerely. "How are the teams responding to the new protocols?" She smiled. "Better than expected. Morale is up 30%, according to the latest employee survey. Turns out people prefer not being pressured to cut corners or falsify reports." I nodded, remembering conversations with workers during my time in entry-level positions. Many had expressed frustration with the ethical compromises they were asked to make, but feared losing their jobs if they objected. "And the West Side Project?" I asked, referring to the troubled development that had been on the verge of collapse when I took over. "Back on track. The community engagement approach you suggested has turned public opinion around. The local council voted unanimously to approve our revised plans. It was a significant victory. The project had become a symbol of my father's business philosophy: maximize profit regardless of community impact. By redesigning it with input from local residents and adding green spaces and affordable housing components, we had transformed it into an example of responsible development." My phone buzzed with a text from Emma: "Board meeting in 30. Your cousin Jessica is here early and wants to see you." I was surprised. Jessica had kept her distance since the will reading, seemingly unsure where her loyalties should lie between her parents, who sided with mine and me. "Send her in," I replied. Minutes later, Jessica entered, looking both nervous and determined. "Amanda," she said, giving me a quick hug. "You look different, more confident." I smiled. 3 months of being called either a genius or an idiot, depending on who you ask, will do that to you. "What brings you by?" She took a deep breath. "I have been thinking about Grandpa Will, about what he saw in each of us. The books he left me, they are not just valuable first editions. They are his philosophy on business and life. I have been reading them, and I think I finally understand what he was trying to teach us all these years." I waited, sensing there was more. "I want to help," she continued. "I know I do not have business experience like you, but my marketing background could be useful. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Robert, they are wrong about what you are doing here." Her support meant more than I could express. Having family on my side, even just one cousin, eased some of the loneliness I had felt since my parents' ultimatum. "Actually," I said, "I have been thinking about refreshing our brand image to reflect the new direction. The marketing team could use someone with your perspective." Her face lit up. "Really? You would trust me with that?" "You are a Wilson too," I reminded her. "Grandpa saw potential in both of us." Our conversation was interrupted by my assistant alerting me that the board meeting would begin soon. Jessica and I walked together to the boardroom, where a very different group awaited than the one I had faced 3 months earlier. 5 of the 12 board members were new, carefully selected for their alignment with my vision for the company. The remaining 7 had demonstrated their commitment to the new direction, or at least their willingness to adapt. Lawrence remained as legal counsel, a steady presence I had come to rely on. As chairwoman, I called the meeting to order. "The first item on our agenda is a report on the ethical audit we commissioned," I began. "Emma, would you please share the findings?" Emma stood professional and poised. The audit identified 17 areas where company practices had drifted from our stated values over the past decade, she explained. "We have already addressed 12 of these issues through policy changes and new oversight mechanisms." She detailed the improvements from labor practices in our overseas facilities to more transparent financial reporting. The board listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated their engagement with the process. As the meeting progressed through updates on various initiatives, I noticed Jessica watching with interest, occasionally taking notes. Her fresh perspective would be valuable in communicating these changes to the public and our clients. Near the end of the meeting, our chief financial officer raised a concerning point. We have received information that Wilson Construction, the new company your father established, is attempting to poach some of our key clients, he reported. They are undercutting our bids significantly, probably operating at a loss to damage our market position. I had expected something like this. Dad had used his portion of the inheritance to start a competing business, clearly intent on undermining my leadership at Wilson Enterprises. It was a desperate move from someone who could not accept his loss of control. How vulnerable are we? I asked. The CFO looked reassured by my calm response. Not very. We have strong relationships with most clients built over decades. A few might be tempted by the lower prices, but most understand the value proposition we offer: quality, reliability, and ethical practices. I nodded. Keep monitoring the situation. If necessary, we can reach out personally to any clients who seem at risk. But we will not engage in a price war. Our standards remain non-negotiable. As the meeting concluded, Lawrence handed me an envelope. This arrived for you yesterday, he said quietly. I thought you might want to open it privately. I recognized Grandpa Lawyer's seal immediately. Back in my office, I opened it carefully to find another letter from him, this one dated just days before his death. Dearest Mandy, it began. If Lawrence is giving you this letter, then 3 months have passed since you took the reins of Wilson Enterprises. I imagine it has not been easy. Change rarely is, especially when it challenges entrenched interests and comfortable patterns. Remember that leadership is not about being the loudest voice in the room, but about creating an environment where the best ideas can flourish. You will make mistakes, that is inevitable. Learn from them, then move forward without dwelling on what might have been. I have watched you grow from a curious child into a principled adult. That journey gives me confidence that you will navigate the challenges ahead with the same integrity and compassion you have always shown. The company is a means to an end, not an end in itself. Use it to create something meaningful, something that improves lives beyond our family. I am proud of you, Mandy. Never doubt that. With eternal love, Grandpa. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. Even now, months after his passing, Grandpa was still guiding me, still believing in me when I doubted myself. A knock at my door pulled me back to the present. Emma entered, followed by Jessica. The press is responding positively to the quarterly report, Emma said. And Jessica has some interesting ideas for the rebranding initiative. I wiped away my tears and tucked Grandpa's letter safely into my desk drawer. All right, I said, straightening my shoulders. Let us get to work. The coming months would bring more challenges, more difficult decisions. But in that moment, surrounded by people who shared my vision and fortified by Grandpa's wisdom, I felt ready to face whatever came next. 1 year to the day after Grandpa Harold's passing, I stood beside his grave in the peaceful cemetery overlooking the lake he had loved. The early morning mist was lifting sunlight, breaking through to sparkle on the dewy grass. I had come alone, wanting this moment of reflection to be private. I placed a bouquet of wildflowers against his headstone, simple blooms he had taught me to identify during our walks in the woods behind his lake house. So much had changed in the year since he left us, yet his presence remained strong in my decisions, my values, and the company that bore our family name. Grandpa, I said softly, I hope I have made you proud. The company is thriving not just financially, but in all the ways that would matter to you. And it was true. Wilson Enterprises had navigated the transition, successfully emerging stronger and more respected in the industry. Our commitment to ethical practices had attracted new clients who shared our values, more than offsetting those few who had been lured away by my father's competing business. Speaking of my father's venture, Wilson Construction had struggled from the beginning. Without the reputation and relationships that had sustained our family company for decades, they found it difficult to establish a foothold. Last month, I had heard through industry channels that they were already scaling back operations, unable to sustain the artificially low bids they had used to try to poach our clients. As for my parents themselves, I had not spoken directly with either since that confrontational meeting in the boardroom. Mom had sent a terse email 3 months ago, inquiring about selling some company shares she still held from earlier distributions. It was purely transactional, without any personal content. I had facilitated the sale through Lawrence, responding with similar professionalism, while leaving the door open for more meaningful communication. She had not taken the opportunity. You were right about so many things. I continued my one-sided conversation with Grandpa, especially about the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people. Emma had become not just a trusted colleague, but a dear friend, her legal expertise and moral compass helping navigate complex decisions. Lawrence remained a steadfast advisor, though he had begun transitioning toward retirement, training younger attorneys to eventually take his place. Jessica had found her niche in our marketing department, her fresh perspective, helping reposition the company brand to better reflect our values. Even Travis, my cousin who had initially allied himself with my father, had recently reached out asking tentatively if there might be a role for him at Wilson Enterprises. His own business ventures had apparently faltered, and he was reassessing his priorities. I had suggested he start in a junior position to learn the business properly, a test of whether his interest was genuine or merely opportunistic. Lost in thought, I almost did not notice the figure approaching across the cemetery until she was quite close. My mother dressed elegantly as always, but with a hesitancy in her step I had never seen before. "I did not expect to find you here," she said, stopping a few feet away. "It is the anniversary," I replied simply. She nodded, looking at the headstone rather than at me. I remember the date. An awkward silence stretched between us. I waited, sensing she had more to say. "Your father and I have separated," she finally continued. 3 months ago. I did not know if you had heard." I shook my head. I had not. The news surprised me, though perhaps it should not have. Their relationship had always seemed based more on mutual ambition than genuine affection. "I am sorry," I offered, and meant it despite everything. Divorce was painful under any circumstances. She shrugged slightly. "It was a long time coming. Without the company to bind us together, we discovered we had little else in common." Another silence fell. A light breeze rustled the trees overhead. "I saw the article in Business Week," she said eventually, "about the changes you have made at the company. The ethical reforms. They were quite complimentary." "Yes," I acknowledged. "We have worked hard to realign with Grandpa's original vision." She looked directly at me for the first time. "He would be proud, Amanda, for whatever that is worth coming from me." The admission clearly cost her something in pride. I recognized it as the closest thing to an apology I was likely to receive. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means something, actually." She glanced back at the headstone, then at the flowers I had brought. "He always did prefer wildflowers to store-bought arrangements, said they had more character." The small personal memory surprised me. Perhaps there had been more genuine connection between them than I had realized, at least in the early days. "Would you like a moment alone with him?" I offered, preparing to leave. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I have said what I needed to say over the years. I came hoping to find you, actually. Lawrence mentioned you often visit on Sunday mornings." That caught me off guard. "You were looking for me." She nodded, a vulnerability in her expression I had rarely seen. "I have been doing a lot of thinking, Amanda. About choices. About priorities. About what Harold was trying to teach us all those years." I waited, not wanting to interrupt whatever process she was working through. "I was jealous," she admitted, "of the relationship you had with him. My own father was distant, critical. I never felt I could please him. When Harold showed you the affection and approval I had craved from my own father, it stirred something ugly in me. I took it out on you, a child who deserved better." The honesty of her self-reflection moved me. It did not erase the years of neglect, but it offered a context I had not fully appreciated. "We cannot change the past, Mom," I said gently, "but the future is still unwritten." She looked at me with cautious hope. "I would like to try if you are willing. Not with the company that is yours now, and rightfully so, but perhaps as mother and daughter." I thought of Grandpa's wisdom about forgiveness, not as a gift to others, but as freedom for oneself. Holding on to resentment would only continue the cycle of pain that had defined our family for too long. "I would like that," I said. "It will take time, but I am willing to try." Relief softened her features. She reached into her purse and handed me an envelope. "I wrote this last night in case I lost my nerve today. It explains more than I can say in person right now." I accepted it, tucking it away to read later when I could process it fully. "Have you had breakfast?" I asked. "There's a cafe near here that Grandpa used to love. They make incredible blueberry pancakes." She smiled tentatively. "That sounds nice." As we walked together toward the cemetery gates, I felt a sense of possibility that had been absent from our relationship for as long as I could remember. Reconciliation would be a journey, not a destination, but taking the first step was significant. My father, I learned later, had moved to Florida and shown no interest in reconnecting. That was his choice, and I had made peace with it. Some relationships could not be saved, at least not yet. Perhaps time would soften his position as it had my mother, but I would not put my life on hold waiting for that change. 2 weeks after that cemetery meeting, he appeared unexpectedly at my office. Unlike my mother visit, his came with no vulnerability, no reflection. He needed money. His business was failing, and he hoped to leverage our familial connection despite having severed it himself. I did not give him the cash he asked for, but I did offer him something potentially more valuable: honest feedback about his business model and suggestions for how he might salvage what remained. He left angry, but with information that could help him if he chose to use it. The ball was in his court. As the second year of my leadership at Wilson Enterprises began, I felt Grandpa's influence in every major decision, not as a restrictive force, but as an ethical compass that helped navigate complex choices. The company continued to evolve, as did I. The true inheritance I had come to realize was not the money or even the company itself. It was the values, the perspective, and the courage to stand by one's convictions even when doing so was difficult. That legacy was something my parents had never understood and thus could never take from me, no matter how many checks they burned. What is your most valuable inheritance? Has there been a time when you chose principles over profit in your own life? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might find meaning in it. Thank you for being part of this reflection with me today. Remember that true wealth is measured not by what we possess, but by the values we choose to live by.